One of the fundamental facts about politics and human psychology is that it's very, very difficult for most people to learn from the success of others. I don't know why that is, and I can't say that normal people find it tremendously easy by contrast to learn from the failure of others either. maybe human beings just don't like learning, period. It's a bit of a bleak lesson for me to draw from this. But I remember, kick it off with a seemingly random example. I remember when I was in Laos, many, many times I was talking about politics, specific political issues and political problems that the government was dealing with in Laos. Sometimes with government officials, sometimes just with erudite people within that struggling third world communist post-war country. And I noticed they would often be very comfortable and even a little bit smug when they themselves would make comparisons to the United States. Now, the United States is quite generous towards Laos because the United States has a history of bombing it to smithereens. But so many of the government officials had been on junkets, on paid trips to the United States. So, for whatever reason, the federal government of the United States pays for some Lao government officials to come and attend a conference or have a tour of a university or something. And they would always be shocked by the crowds of homeless people and beggars that they saw everywhere they went in the United States. And they went to some weird places, too. They'd go to Minneapolis or something, for whatever reason. I think the U.S. federal government has a commitment to spreading out the money for their projects in the U.S., so, not everything is happening in New York and Washington, D.C. But, they would actually come back with quite a smug sense that the United States is full of beggars despite being a wealthy country, and the United States is some kind of failure, and they would see how dirty and grubby things were in the United States. Something like a bus station in the United States, or even the border controls. And, they would often have a lifetime of reading, the very critical press in the United States. The United States, in many ways, it does a great job of broadcasting its social problems. It's constantly engaged in meditations on poverty, violence, homelessness, racism. I mean, yes, the United States is a country that has problems with racism, but it's also a country that's become tremendously articulate in reflecting on and meditating on its history of racism and its current problems with racism, which is a much more positive situation than being in a country that's sleepwalking through those problems or ignoring them. I have a lot of respect for American culture for those reasons. Really, I do. Really, I do. But I noticed when talking to Lao government officials about political problems, if you ever suggested a positive contrast, you say, "Oh well, yes, but have you looked at how that works in Switzerland or Sweden?" But I mean, we talked about the Swiss quite often because Switzerland also is a landlocked country. Laos is a landlocked. Switzerland is a mountainous country. And they'd get very uncomfortable. And quite a few of the people I talked to, they'd actually met Swiss. They'd met Swiss people who were there for humanitarian reasons or government projects of some kind. And the Swiss themselves apparently were not humble in making such comparisons. They just say straight up, this is how we do it in Switzerland. You guys are a mess. You guys are disorganized. This is pathetic. Whatever. This hospital is pathetic compared to how we run a hospital in Switzerland, or the way you run elections, talking about democracy or freedom of the press, that apparently the Swiss, I've never had this kind of conversation with a Swiss person myself, but apparently the Swiss, when they were doing humanitarian work in that third world context, they would just straight up lay out that everything was better in Switzerland. And I think they're right. Switzerland has a lot to be proud of. As you know, they're kind of hated within Europe and within Western culture because of the role they played in World War II. There is certainly a shadow hanging over them in that sense. But in terms of local democracy, in terms of how the mayor's office works, in terms of how decisions are taken publicly, in terms of things like referendums, I actually do not know if I should say referenda or referendums. In my university, they taught me to always say referendums, not referenda, but could be one of many lies I was taught at university. Look, now I'm sure if I had devoted years of my life to studying the politics of Switzerland in the same way that I studied Laos and Cambodia, that I would know about a lot of serious social problems and political problems in Switzerland also. I am not saying Switzerland is paradise by any means. But it really struck me how uncomfortable these people were with learning from another country's success, and that all the joy drained out of the conversation, in contrast to the sort of glee they had in trying to learn from another country's failure. And I see this on a human scale as well. I mean, there's been an orgy of people kind of comparing themselves to Freely and comparing themselves to Durian Rider, and supposedly, feeling that they're so superior to these people. But I mean, when I've been talking about the present and future of veganism and social movement, I've been making comparisons to really successful social movements. I'll just stick with one for this video. Like I've said again and again, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. In a very short period of time, Mothers Against Drunk Driving had this, tremendous institutional and political success. And not only do they have offices all over the United States, not only do they really have influence over government, but they have influence in the classroom. They have education programs where they are in schools, promoting their propaganda, frankly. I mean, it's propaganda that's against drinking alcohol. I myself drink zero alcohol, so, I sympathize with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, no doubt. I drink zero alcohol. I also drive zero cars. So on both scores, I'm inclined to sympathize. But still, it's propaganda within the school system, within the classroom. They've had this tremendous success. I mean, to my knowledge, I've never seen another vegan make that comparison. It's my pressure cooker. Cooking up Ira and me. This is Job's Tears. Shout out to Ira and me. I think that's on the official list of superfoods. For those of you who are keeping a list of superfoods at home. Can we learn from success instead of failure? Why is it so incredibly rare? I mean, whether it's in veganism, ecology, or what have you. Instead of gloating over disasters, instead of gloating over failures, instead of pointing the finger and saying, you guys are doing social activism wrong, you guys are doing political lobbying wrong, why do I see so little of examining who is doing it right and asking the question, how can we learn from their success? Now, I say so little, aside from my own channel, I don't think I've ever seen a single example of that on YouTube. And actually, I would have to think back a long way in terms of written articles, because I used to read on paper, publications about ecology, animal rights, ecological activism. Back then, we used the word vegetarian, not vegan, because I was being strictly vegetarian, but same basic movement, same thing. I have to think way back in terms of reading on paper articles or articles now posted on the internet. Even an article really doing that. And as you guys probably know, I just had a video recently talking about the issue of slavery and the abolition of slavery. I've had in the past videos talking about Mohandas Gandhi, the political movements for independence within the history of India. When people make those comparisons, I find them tremendously insincere, simply tremendously ignorant, and misguided. Now someone could make a sincere video or article really examining the history of the struggle of India to liberate itself from the British Empire. I think it would be incredibly difficult to construe any meaningful parallelism to the struggle that vegans are in today. I think that's why people don't do it seriously, why people just do it in this facile and insincere way. They just want to bring up the name of Gandhi because it's a famous name, and they've probably never even read one serious article or one serious book about who Gandhi was and what his political legacy really is, which is tremendously odious, by the way. This is not a simple, black and white moral issue. The legacy of who Gandhi was and what he did, there are many, many negative aspects to it. Heard of the caste system? I could talk all day about Gandhi, but I've done the reading. And I sit back, as you guys know, with some degree of horror when I see vegans trying to compare the future of this movement to the Arab Spring. People have so when you say the Arab Spring, I notice you say the Arab Spring and not the Syrian Civil War. You don't name Syria, you don't name Egypt, you don't name Libya, you don't name any specific country as a supposedly successful example. So, is this a success? But then again, we've talked about the history of India or the history of slavery. What really is the comparison you're making? And in a rigorous, meaningful sense, what are the lessons you're trying to learn? And how do you apply that to your vegan activism now? Because ultimately, as I've said recently, well, if you really believe that violent abolitionist movements, like the abolition of slavery, if that's your model, is that how you're living? because it seems to me, whether you're wearing bikinis on Instagram or you're giving lectures in universities, I actually do not see anyone attempting to lead an abolitionist vegan movement in that sense, a movement that really resembles or reflects the history of how slavery was abolished in the United States. I don't see anyone calling for a vegan civil war. To do so would be madness and folly, and I myself am opposed to it because I endorse completely nonviolent, completely democratic methods, as you guys probably know. It's difficult for people to look at examples that are more successful than themselves, I suppose because of jealousy on some level. There's a video I was considering putting a clip in here. I think I'm not going to use the clip. A guy named Lord Jamar, he comments on hip-hop, rap culture, etc. A guy named Lord Jamar had some comments about the history of the gay rights movement, and you could really hear there was kind of jealousy in his voice. He was really effectively jealous of the tremendous success that the gay rights movement had in a period of just 20 years. Or a period of just a few decades, in contrast to sort of a centuries-long struggle for civil rights for black people, a struggle for black people in the United States that he felt was much less successful over a much longer period of time. Now, I mean, on some level, I think the vast majority of people would just say Lord Jamar is homophobic. He is. I would say that he has more like a homomania than homophobia. He is politically opposed to gay people. He is anti-gay. That is one element of what's going on here. But the element of jealousy or of refusing to learn from the success of others is really the element that interests me, that sparks my interest a little bit. Could we think about what were the advantages and disadvantages for why gay rights did have tremendous, much more rapid success than the situation of advancement of African American peoples in the United States? I think it's actually quite easy. If you sit down and start to make a checklist, there are many, many differences. For one thing, the geographic distribution of homosexuals is pretty much random and even. Gay people exist everywhere in the United States. They're born and raised everywhere. And their socioeconomic distribution is also random. So some gay people are poor, but some are rich. Their distribution into different types of professions is almost random. There are a couple of professions, I think, where still today there are very, very few homosexuals or none. But the point is there have always been some gay people who were lawyers, some gay people who were politicians, even if they were in the closet in the past. There have always been some gay people in highly skilled and highly educated professions, as well as throughout basically all other forms of work and labor. So a movement for civil rights, or just to politically have a voice, to organize, that begins with that it's tremendous strength, that begins with having homosexuals everywhere, in every corner of life. And again, this is just cultural, but within the United States, I think it's true that homosexuals were especially successful in the city of Los Angeles and in Hollywood and in the press. And there were many institutions and many jobs where historically, by contrast, especially if you want to go back to, say, the 1940s, that African Americans, that black people were totally excluded from, where there were none at all. And another, really interesting contrast, just from my own grandmother's time. My grandmother's now deceased, by the way. The situation for Jews in the United States and Canada, again, just go back to the 1930s, basically before World War II. Even though there's this sort of myth that Jews were highly, highly educated and were well represented in the best jobs, when my grandmother went to college, they still had a quota on how many Jews were allowed into the skilled professions and trades and areas of studies. Now, I do not know to what extent that quota was really originated from the government of Canada. In Canada, the universities themselves, the institutions themselves, they may have themselves just had that quota. A lot of that kind of quota-based oppression comes from a kind of local level and may not reflect any kind of grand government scheme. So my own grandmother, when she went into a trade school, basically, their attitude was, oh, okay, we have our 2 Jews for the year, or whatever the number was. They admitted a certain number of Jewish people per year, period, and then they refused the rest. That was their policy. And on a more informal level, that again didn't get handed down from the government. Recently, I heard a sort of autobiography from a journalist, and he was talking about in the old days. I don't know exactly when this was. He was saying, but again, this is before the conclusion of World War II, that the attitudes when he was applying for jobs at newspapers, their attitudes were, we already have 1 Jewish reporter, so we don't. not absolute racism. They did have one, but their attitude, it was what we call tokenism today. Their attitude was they had one guy already who was Jewish, so therefore they're not going to hire anymore. So, I mean, this kind of exclusion that, again, visibly or invisibly, in terms of the period of time that homosexuals had their struggle, it was a totally different situation strategically from the situation that African Americans were in, let's say, again, after World War II, when very, very much intentional top-down program of what's called redlining, of ghettoization, of forcing African Americans to live in some neighborhoods and not others, of refusing to allow African Americans to have access to loans that would allow them to build their own houses, buy their own houses, own their own houses, to force them to be renting ghettoized apartments in neighborhoods that ultimately were defined on a map by the United States government at all levels. That involved the federal government and local municipalities, local mayors, districts, and so on. Redlining and the impacts that has in the fact that African Americans were not evenly distributed geographically. Of course, ultimately, where they were had to do with the history of slavery, but then more recently, redlining, ghettoization. They were not distributed in all professions. It was just not the case in 1955 that you had a whole lot of African Americans who were judges and lawyers and architects. And there's a very real history of oppression of why that was, and simply exclusion from educational opportunities and economic, paucity of opportunities, what have you. African Americans started off with one of the most extreme set of disadvantages in the world. And yes, their struggle took centuries. So, I'm just saying, even starting from this kind of totally negative, jealous, ultimately homophobic statement from Lord Jamar, where he's complaining that gay rights as a movement, as a social movement, was so much more successful in a short period of time than African American struggle for civil rights. Can we move past that? Can we learn from the success of other social movements, whether it's Mothers Against Drunk Driving or gay rights or what have you? And if we can't, why not? For me, right now in 2016, that's interesting. And again, I'm not really interested in heaping scorn on other YouTubers who are even less successful than I am in terms of their political advocacy or lobbying or activism or what have you. I mean, I rate my own success a 1 out of 10, and other people get a 0 out of 10, but so what? And, you guys heard me talking about Saoirse Morava. I just see zero utility in my coming on YouTube and saying, so, Saoirse Morava, you're doing it wrong. Your form of advocacy, your form of activism is even more of a failure than mine. I get a 1 out of 10, but you get a 0. I mean, if 10 out of 10 is Mothers Against Drunk Driving, I'm a little bit better than 0 because at least I have the aspiration. I mean, again, people who watch this channel, if you watched a few videos, it mostly is about aspirations. It's about what I want to do in the future. It's about what I want to do in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, in the next 30 years. That's really what this channel is about. It's trying to get people excited and motivated and ultimately organized to support something real with real outcomes in that future. But here and now, yes, I could spend hours criticizing Saoirse Morava or Freely or any of these other so-called activists for how lousy their activism is. But for me, it would be much more meaningful and rewarding to do, and again, I have done this repeatedly, to point at a success story, to say, look, gay rights was really successful. Why? And what are we failing to do? How can we learn from that? How can we adapt aspects of their strategy so that we have the same advantages? And you guys know, if you watch this channel, I've pointed out crucially that community building is fundamental to their success. Having a visible community with restaurants and nightclubs and, yes, lawyers' offices and foundations, real political organizations that have a bricks and mortar reality to them. I think that's absolutely crucial long-term to why gay rights was successful in the way that it was. The fact that there is a gay district, a gay neighborhood in San Francisco or in many, many cities around the world. I think Rome now even has a gay district. I mean, Rome, Italy, is one of the most homophobic places in the world, but I know they do have gay rights marches and what have you. Gay rights becoming, gay people going from being an invisible, in-the-closet community to being highly visible, highly organized, highly vocal, and having real neighborhoods and real community associations. Now, again, I think there are also interesting questions. So I had this person writing to me from Florida I don't know. I've actually never looked. Are there gay retirement homes? I don't know. But I'm guessing there are gay positive retirement homes. There are retirement homes that say, look, we're not homophobic, that whether they give the rainbow logo or what, that say, look, we do accept elderly people who are openly gay. You don't have to be in the closet here. I think a lot of institutions, it's not that they become gay exclusive, but they find ways to communicate to their customers that they are gay positive, that they are not homophobic. And again, I think even things like hospitals, I think all kinds of services. But definitely, in terms of vacations, in terms of holidays, gay positive resort hotels, gay positive beach destinations, they will advertise. Again, some of them may be exclusively gay. They may be entirely for gay people. But more commonly, again, there will be a rainbow logo and there will be something saying, look, we accept gays, lesbians, bisexual. We're not going to expect you to live in the closet if you choose to come here on vacation. That can be a very important thing for people to know. For vegans, it's something you can't even stay in the closet on for one day if you eat 3 meals a day, right? You don't really have the option. If you're gay and you want a retirement home, you absolutely need a vegan positive retirement home. You absolutely need a vegan positive hospital. It's hell. If you're in a hospital dealing with hospital food, if you're bedridden in a hospital or something for just 2 days, you have to have a friend in the hospital go down the street, buy you food, bring it back to you, and come to your bedside. Which, by the way, I did for my wife every single day she was in the hospital after my daughter was born. All 3 meals a day I was bringing to my wife's bedside. She's now my ex-wife. I'm divorced, blah, blah, blah. That struggle. And again, obviously, for something like a vacation, if you're a single person, if you're just one adult, maybe you can go on vacation to a beach destination or what have you that's not vegan positive. If you're a family, if you're an elderly person, if you have any other problem, and also for your own convenience, even if you're single, of course, you really need these destinations to identify as vegan positive. Although, again, maybe it's too much to ask that they actually be exclusively vegan. On the other hand, that's what a lot of us are really looking for, isn't it? Aren't a lot of us looking for a vacation where the destination is, if not vegan, actually exclusively vegan, where the other people we meet are going to be vegan, where we know our money is not going to support, roasting a giant pig or serving lobster? Because if you pay for an all-you-can-eat buffet, and you know you're paying for meat, and you see it displayed there, that's what you're paying for, that's what you're supporting. Ultimately, for a vegan, that's really depressing and sad. You go on vacation, you pay for that buffet. You personally may only choose to select the bits and pieces that are vegan, but there it is sitting in front of you. They killed a whole pig and roasted it. They killed a bunch of lobsters and boiled them, and they're being proudly displayed for the people who pay for this buffet. It's sad. It's just fundamentally, it's not what we're looking for. But so who in any of these things, who has been successful? Can we learn from that success? I really encountered in Southeast Asia when I was involved with humanitarian work, including research into the evaluation of humanitarian work and including the actual work of helping people. There's a tremendous reluctance with any specific question in that field to start with the question of who's already done this, who has been the most successful, who sets the standard for excellence, whom we can learn from. So for any particular project, it may deal with HIV/AIDS, may deal with orphans, may deal with alleviating starvation, may deal with improving agriculture. There's all sorts of humanitarian work. It may deal with homeless people or prostitution or anything else. If you start to look around and say, okay, who has been the most successful in this country or in this region, or you can do globally, you can look at what are the most successful projects that have been out there. It may force you, for example, to very humbly look at the success of the Catholic Church. There have been some extremely successful charity projects operated by Catholics, Catholic missionaries, or Catholic organizations of different kinds. Do you have it in you? Because, I'm biased. I'm an atheist. I do not like the Catholic Church. Can I set aside that bias and learn from their success? Learn from what they're doing right on every level in terms of the fundraising, in terms of delivering the service to the people they're helping in humanitarian work. There may be political factors, et cetera, et cetera. Can I actually set that aside and learn from them? If you're looking at education in any situation, the best school, again, within Laos or Cambodia or within downtown Toronto, Canada, the best school may be a religious school. It may be Catholic, it may be Protestant. If you're actually looking at improving an educational institution, whether it's on a charity basis, whatever the situation is, do you have it in you to set aside your biases and say, let's look at this school, Catholic school, Protestant school, this elite school, and see what they're doing right, even if my objectives are to provide quality education to poverty-stricken people. I may be biased against that school simply because it's elite. I may simply have hostility against rich people because they're rich or whatever it is. Can we set that aside and learn from the success? So, look, in this video, I've kind of alluded to a lot of the lessons I've learned from being mixed up in political science and what have you. But, one of the most fundamental lessons I learned on this topic, learning from other people's success, really just came from the theater. And this applies to vegans within YouTube, the digital demimonde, but this also applies to real-world activism, really organizing political foundations or what have you for the future. It's never reasonable to expect excellence. So you have to be prepared to overcome or debunk or dismiss people who come at you with the excuse of, well, what did you expect? Whether that's, well, what did you expect me to do? Because what did you expect me to do? I'm just one activist. What did you expect me to do on my YouTube channel? Why did you expect it to be better? What do you expect from, why should I be better? Why should I live up to these unreasonable expectations? Whether it's on that level or whether it is, on the level of the city or specific society you represent, if you are writing theater criticism, and today, I don't even know in these cities, I don't know if live theater really exists anymore. Because, obviously YouTube in many ways has replaced live theater. People have said for decades that television and movies would replace live theater. But ultimately, I think it's the internet that is killing live theater. Live theater may finally disappear from the Western world in many ways. But, if you're going to write criticism of live theater in Toronto, it is no excuse for the people being criticized to say, well, this is only Toronto. What did you expect? I expected excellence. If I'm a critic, I'm looking for the best of the best. I'm looking for you to do the impossible. Sure. But there is no sense in which I can say, well, this is only Toronto, not New York City. So this performance of Anton Chekhov's The Cherry Orchard, what can you expect? What can you expect? Expect excellence. Expect the impossible. Look for it. Doesn't mean you have to be a jerk about it. But what we're engaged in here, politically or what have you, there is just no sense in which it's useful to start the process by lowering your expectations because you have contempt for the people involved or because you have contempt for the location. That's really what it is that somehow in New York City, culture is supposed to be more refined than it is in Toronto or Victoria or Vientiane, the capital city of Laos. And it's just not true. People are people no matter where you are. The apparatus you need, let's talk about an incredibly daunting theater production. You're going to put on a theatrical adaptation of the A Song of Ice and Fire books. A Song of Ice and Fire, also known as Game of Thrones. An incredibly daunting task. You know what? I think you could put that on with no set, with no special effects, just actors on a black stage with a couple of chairs, and you could make it one of the most thrilling and, successful theater productions of the last 10 years. Totally possible. What makes theater great, what makes theater excellent is not really the budget. At a minimum level, you need the budget. What makes something inspiring and effective and hopeful in political activism, of course, is not really the budget, although we do need to engage in fundraising. We do need to build up the credibility and trust with our constituency so that we can raise the funds, so that in a sense we have the stage to perform on, so that we have the stage and the costumes so that we can go to City Hall or go to Parliament, so that we can maintain actual political foundations, actual lobbying of government, etc., etc. But excellence, whether it is excellence in education, excellence in the theater, excellence in political advocacy and activism, excellence in this very strange art form that we're engaged in on YouTube. It's always unreasonable to expect excellence, and it's always possible for people to make this excuse, what did you expect of me? As if excellence was not an option, excellence was not on offer. It's unreasonable to expect excellence, but we go ahead, be unreasonable. Expect the best of the best. And when you don't get it, as I've just been saying, don't be a jerk about it. There's no point being a jerk about how much smarter I am than Saoirse Morava. If I make a bunch of videos about that, how is that going to advance the movement? How is that going to advance the vegan cause in any way? Don't be a jerk about it. Go back to topic 1 for this video. Examine what's really been successful in this field of endeavor, whatever the field is. Examine the best of the best. Look at case studies of extraordinary success, and don't be jealous, don't be dismissive. Really try to evaluate what are the differences, what are the strategic advantages, what were the decisions that brought about that success, how can we learn from that and adapt that to our own cause.